The mysterious ride that changed everything. That night, the sky was moonless. Sarfaraz, a young man living in a shabby slum on the outskirts of Lahore, pedaled his rickety rickshaw farther than usual. The scorching winds from the red clay walls and the steam rising from the asphalt made his throat burn, but his hunger was deeper. He thirsted for a passenger, for a simple dinner of rice and vegetables for his mother, and for one night without hearing her cough violently from the lack of medicine. He ventured all the way to the edge of the city, where even the street lights began to fade. No one expected to find passengers there. But Sarfaraz had no other choice. In his mind echoed his mother's words from the night before. Sarfaraz, we're out of rice. There's only a few drops of oil left. The rent hasn't been paid in 3 months. I can't bear to borrow anymore. Sarfaraz gripped the handlebars tighter. His calloused hands were cracked like dry riverbeds. He told himself that if he didn't earn anything today, he'd sell his old phone tomorrow. Then, in that eerie, desolate silence, 3 shadows appeared. From a distance, they looked like black streaks gliding between the brown earth and the indigo sky. 3 girls, cloaked from head to toe in black burqas. The wind caught their flowing garments, making them look like drifting phantoms. Sarfaraz stopped cautiously. A strange feeling stirred inside him, part relief at the chance of a fare, part something else he couldn't name. Brother, could you take us to Shahabli? The voice of the first girl floated over, soft as breath, but sharp as a blade slicing through the air. He nodded without asking questions. He needed money. Even just a little. Even just a thank you. Shahabli, he knew the place. About 2 kilometers away. A colonial-era mansion, long abandoned and shrouded in chilling rumors. People called it the House of the Unrest. The rickshaw rolled slowly over the bumpy road. In the back, the girls giggled and whispered in a mixed dialect of Urdu, an accent that sounded both ancient and from another time. He caught a vague fragment. Tonight the moon won't rise, yet the birds still return to their nests. No one asked the fare. No one spoke to him. Until one of them said quietly, as if just remembering, "Oh, driver, we don't have any cash. Sorry, we forgot to mention it." His heart sank like a stone in mud. But he smiled anyway. A weary, gentle smile. "It's all right. It's late, and this place is deserted. I couldn't leave you stranded." Shahabli emerged like a scar across the city's skin. Its walls blotched with moss and mold, the iron gate rusted, and the trees had overgrown the tiled roof like time's fingers prying into every crack. The house had no lights, no sounds. But something felt, as if it were waiting. The 3 girls stepped off the rickshaw without a word. They pushed open the gate without a key. As they disappeared inside, the gate creaked shut behind them as if drawn by something invisible. Sarfaraz turned to leave, then his eyes caught it, a black cloth pouch, lying silently on the back seat. One of the girls had left it behind. He picked it up, heavy. Curious. Concerned. Hesitant. Should I go back? Reason said no. But his conscience, where belief and decency still lived, said, it belongs to someone. Whoever they are. He approached the iron gate. It creaked open again before his hand even touched it. The house was deathly silent. No lights. No breathing. A sound echoed from deep within, a sob. A laugh. Or just the wind, exhaling. Sarfaraz placed the pouch on the doorstep, then turned to leave. When he got home, his mother was already waiting. Her face was wrinkled, her eyes filled with worry, yet still radiated the serenity of a bodhisattva watching from the doorway of poverty. He placed the pouch on the table. They left this behind. She opened it, and what was inside left them both speechless. Jewelry. Gold. Precious stones. Strings of pearls. A tiny crown. An ancient necklace. Not just valuable, but seemingly from a long-lost culture, distant, mystical, not something belonging to ordinary humans. His mother took a deep breath. Then gently said, "My son, this is an Amanate trust. Whether left by a person, or something else, your heart must not falter." Sarfaraz nodded. He understood. A doorway had opened in his life, an invisible one. And behind it wasn't just treasure, but a 1,000-year-old secret waiting to be revealed. The next morning, Sarfaraz sat blankly beside an old teapot. His mind was preoccupied with the black cloth pouch still lying quietly in his mother's wardrobe like a heavy secret. She didn't say anything more, but her gaze, deep and unwavering, seemed to be guarding an ancient moral code. Don't spend it. Don't sell it. Don't speak of it. Even though the house was bare, only a scoop of rice left, and the landlord had started banging on the door every morning. Sarfaraz quietly left the house, pedaling into the city. But that day, strangely, there were no passengers. Not a single soul. As if the world had rushed ahead, leaving him spinning in a void. Then a sudden thought lit up in Sarfaraz's mind. I must return to Shahabli. I have to see for myself, is it truly abandoned? A quiet voice inside whispered. You're not looking for people. You're seeking the truth. If you're still watching this video and if you believe that there are divine beings in this world, please comment number 3 below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I suggest you do and turn on the bell so you won't miss any of our videos. Your support helps us keep making meaningful content to inform and inspire you. The house reappeared after an hour of pedaling. The trees on both sides had grown taller than the day before. Dust lay so thick the tire marks from yesterday had vanished. Sarfaraz stood at the gate, clutching the pouch. He brought it with him this time. His palms were slick with sweat. Not just from the heat but because something inside was watching him. He pushed the gate. This time it didn't budge. A dry click snapped behind him. An old man stood there, white-bearded, holding a bamboo cane. His eyes were sunken, as if they'd seen too many lifetimes. Young man, what are you doing here? I brought 3 women here last night. They left this behind. The old man paused. A long silence followed. You said, women. Here. Last night. Yes. 3 of them. In black robes. The old man didn't respond. He took a step back, looking at Sarfaraz like he had stepped out from another realm. Then he said softly, Shahabli has been abandoned, for 20 years. 20 years. Sarfaraz stood frozen. His forehead damp. Mouth dry. That's impossible. I just dropped them off last night. The old man shook his head. You're not the first to see what shouldn't be seen. This house once belonged to the noble Aftab family. Rich, respected, until something forbidden happened. It began, like all tragedies do, with pride and the illusion of power. Afroz, one of the sons, was young, brilliant, but seduced by dark teachings on necromancy and summoning spirits. He believed that by performing Amali Jinn, an ancient ritual, he could summon and control a Jinn, spirit that dwells between worlds. For 7 nights, Afroz chanted incantations on the rooftop of Shahabli. On the 8th night, the wind changed direction. Echoes called his name from downstairs, though no one was awake. And then, he succeeded. He opened a gate between two worlds. But jinn are not pets. They are ancient beings, banished from the light for their pride, equal to that of Lucifer. Once summoned, they never leave. They cling to places. They wear new faces. They mimic laughter. They live in darkness made visible. Afra's younger sister began screaming every night. Said she saw a woman with no eyes standing at the foot of her bed. Said that under the table, there was a child with no shadow. Then one night the entire family vanished. No farewell. No trace. The old man looked at Sarfaraz. Since that day, Shahabli has been a tear in the fabric of our reality. Whoever wanders in, takes something with them. Sarfaraz opened the black pouch in front of him. I didn't take it. I just want to return it. The old man's eyes softened. He pointed to the Bodhi tree by the gate. If it truly belongs to them, they'll come for you. But how do I know who they are? The man didn't answer. He whispered something in Arabic, then walked away. Sarfaraz stood there, under the midday sun, with a pouch of gold in his hand and a question no one dared answer. If the one receiving the gift is a spirit, what does that make the one giving it? That night, Sarfaraz dreamed. Not of images but sounds. The clicking of wooden sandals across old floorboards. Soft giggles. A voice whispering near his ear. Thank you for your kindness. But, can you hold on to it forever? He woke up drenched in sweat. Outside, his mother still slept, fingers wrapped around a prayer bead strand worn smooth by years. Sarfaraz looked out the window. The shutter creaked in the night breeze. And from the yard he was certain someone had just passed by. 3 days later, Sarfaraz no longer pedaled around the city as before. He carried a somber air about him like someone who had just returned from a world no one else believed existed. The black cloth pouch had been hidden deep in the wardrobe, beneath his late father's old sweater. But it refused to rest. Every night, Sarfaraz dreamed. No longer dreams, but memories that weren't his own. He saw himself walking through a hallway draped in black silk, where the faint sound of sandals echoed. He saw a cracked mirror in the grand hall and instead of his reflection, there were 3 pairs of deep eyes, dark as a moonless night. It was them. The 3 girls. The 3 souls. The 3 female jinn. One afternoon, just before sunset, Sarfaraz decided to return to Shahabli for the last time, he told himself. But this time, he didn't go alone. By chance, he picked up an old man from a nearby village. On the ride back, Sarfaraz asked him, "Do you know Shahabli?" The old man froze. That look again, the kind seen only in those who had witnessed more than they dare speak of. "I know it. A haunted house, once home to a cursed bloodline." "But why do you ask?" Sarfaraz hesitated. Then, as if something inside was urging him, he told the whole story. About the 3 women in the dead of night. About the black pouch filled with gold and jewels. About the dream that replayed each night like a karmic loop. The old man said nothing. He stared down the jagged road toward Havli, then softly said, "Son, there are spirits that are not evil, but they do not belong to this world. They come to test the human heart. Perhaps you were chosen, or cursed." "Cursed?" Sarfaraz whispered, confused. "Yes. Because not everyone can see them. Not everyone is entrusted with an Amanate gift that is both reward and burden. The old man then shared a tale long buried. That the 3 girls who once lived in Shahabli were indeed the daughters of the first man to summon a Janafras. But after the family vanished, no one knew what became of them. There are rumors, he said, that the 3 daughters never died. That they are no longer fully human. That they exist between realms both present and trapped. Then why did they appear that night? Sarfaraz asked. Maybe, to test you. To see if you're someone who can protect the Amanat, or someone who would be consumed by it. That evening, Sarfaraz sat quietly beside his mother. The flickering oil lamp cast a gentle glow across her worn, compassionate face. My son, she whispered, you've held onto your heart. But the human heart is not made of iron. If you clutch it too tightly, one day, it may crack. He said nothing. Then, after a while, he rose, opened the wardrobe, and placed the black pouch on the center table. I will return it. Even if it means stepping into the world of the dead, I will return it. His mother didn't stop him. She simply took out a prayer bead strand and placed it in his hand. Walk with the light. If what you face was born of the dark. That night, Sarfaraz left. Alone. Told no one. Left all the lights off. Havli rose before him, shrouded in mist. Its iron gate, already open. Inside, the house was glowing. Not with electricity, but with a pale bluish light, the kind that clings to souls not yet freed. In the grand hall, the 3 girls stood waiting. No longer cloaked in black, but now dressed in silver white silk, their long hair flowing like clouds. Their eyes seemed to hold entire dead galaxies. They knew he would come. One stepped forward, the eldest. She had a high forehead, sharp eyes, and a voice that didn't quite touch the ground. Sarfaraz, you did not betray your heart. You deserve to know the truth. Then they told him, not with words, but through visions that spilled into his mind like a silent film. The 3 girls had died. But their deaths were never completed. They were trapped between worlds because of their father's sin, who had opened the gate and abandoned them. They had tested hundreds of people, each one took the gold, then vanished. Sarfaraz was the first to refuse. The girl looked directly into his eyes. Her breath was like winter wind. You didn't just save us, you redeemed our father's soul. Because even in hell, kindness can redeem the damned. The 3 girls bowed their heads. For the first time, Sarfaraz felt no fear. He stood there, an ordinary man before 3 eternal beings, and did not tremble. One of them, her name was Mahapara, stepped forward. But your test isn't over. If you're willing, we'll help you. But in return, you must open your heart. Sarfaraz didn't understand. Help me, how? To see the world through our eyes. To live as if death no longer frightens you. Then she reached out her hand. Cold. No pulse. Sarfaraz reached out his own. And a new cycle of rebirth began. From that night on, Sarfaraz's life was no longer lonely. Not because he was wealthier. Not because he was more known. But because Mahapara began to appear. Not as a ghostly figure fading in and out of shadows. But as a young woman in flesh, in form, in gaze that stirred the soul. She knocked on Sarfaraz's door on a quiet night. I've come to reclaim the Amanat, and to repay another debt. Mahapara said, her voice as soft as a January breeze. Sarfaraz's mother was startled. A beautiful girl, standing alone in the dark, quiet, and somehow, not quite human. but her eyes pure and sorrowful disarmed every doubt. Mahapara stayed. Her reason: it will take a few days to complete the transfer. But Sarfaraz could feel it. This was more than just a few days. From that night on, whenever his mother and sister had gone to sleep, Mahapara would ride with him through the quiet city streets, seated on the old rickshaw. She didn't say much. She simply watched the city as though she didn't belong to it. "This is where people scream, and then fall silent," she said, pointing at a traffic-heavy intersection. "And over there is the market, where people bargain for everything, even love," she said with a smile, bitter and wise. Sarfaraz didn't dare ask too many questions. But every time she smiled, he felt his heart begin to tremble. One night, as they approached his alley, Mahapara whispered, "If I were human, would you marry me?" Sarfaraz nearly lost control of the bike. Not because of the question, but because he had thought about it. Since her arrival, their home felt warmer, calmer. The meals she cooked, though simple, were full of flavor. His mother, once wary, had come to cherish her like a daughter. His little sister even called her Big Sis. And Sarfaraz? He had begun to dream of things he once forbade himself to hope for. But that night, Mahapara said something he would never forget. "I didn't come here to love. I came to atone." "Atone? For what?" he asked. "I'm the consequence of a sinful father. My sisters and I were never meant to exist like this. But when you rejected the gold, when you held onto your virtue, part of our karmic burden dissolved." She looked up at the sky. A shooting star streaked across it. "I wanted to live for a while, like a human. Like an ordinary girl. Before returning to the realm I belong to." Sarfaraz felt his throat tighten. He wasn't sure what he was feeling: grief, longing, or love. From that day on, Mahapara changed. She was no longer distant. She laughed more. She began asking questions, small ones. Why do birds know how to fly? Why do poor people still smile? Why does your mother's sweet rice smell so different? Sarfaraz answered as best he could, often clumsily. But each time, Mahapara smiled as if the world had found one more reason to stay whole. Then one night, he was attacked. A gang of thugs jumped him while he was fixing the rickshaw. They punched, kicked, and stole all his earnings. The final blow nearly knocked him unconscious. When Sarfaraz opened his eyes, Mahapara was kneeling beside him. "Who saved me?" he whispered. Mahapara looked at him. Her eyes were no longer soft. They burned with a strange violet light. "I did. And so did my sisters. They did what had to be done." Later, he learned the three men vanished. All that remained was a hand-shaped scorch mark on a nearby wall. Sarfaraz began to feel fear. But not of Mahapara. Of himself, of how dependent he was becoming. One morning, he asked, "Why doesn't anyone else see what you truly are?" Mahapara replied, "Because I don't appear this way to anyone else. To them, I'm just an orphaned girl. But to me, you're the last person I trust." That night, they went to the old lake. Its waters, green as jade, reflected the lonely moon. Sarfaraz whispered, "If you leave, will you remember me?" Mahapara didn't answer. She only placed her hand on his chest. "This place used to be where I belonged." "Where?" he asked. "Not this earth. But in wishes never fulfilled." And then, the next morning, she was gone. No farewell. No warning. The room she stayed in was empty. Only her white silk scarf remained. And on the pillow, a frangipani flower, one that could not grow in this land. Sarfaraz's mother didn't ask. She simply said, "The ones you love never truly leave. They just step into another realm, one you can only reach through faith." A week passed. Mahapara had vanished without a trace. Sarfaraz returned to his everyday life, peddling his rickshaw, buying rice, paying rent, living the same days as before. But his heart was no longer the same. He still passed by the places they had gone together. Still bought 2 cups of tea instead of 1. Still waited to hear a knock at the door at midnight. And then, it came. At exactly midnight. A knock. Soft. Steady. Different. Sarfaraz opened the door, holding the prayer beads his mother had left him. Standing outside wasn't Mahapara. It was a letter, tied to the trunk of the frangipani tree on the porch. Under the glow of the oil lamp, the handwriting curled like it had been written by the wind. "If your heart remains unchanged, come to where we first met. Bring nothing except sincerity. Mahapara." Without a second thought, Sarfaraz put on his cloak and stepped into the night. He didn't take the rickshaw. He walked. The road was long, but his spirit was unburdened. The sky was veiled in clouds, the moon hidden, only the light within lit the way. The banyan tree in front of Shahabli emerged from the mist. No wind. No insects. No people. Then he heard laughter, familiar. 3 voices. 3 spirits. 3 souls connected by fate. Mahapara appeared first. Her eyes were just the same, but her gaze now held a faraway sorrow, like that of someone about to leave this life forever. "You came. That means, you passed the final test." "What test?" Sarfaraz asked. "To keep your heart steady. Not to search. Not to despair. Not to sell your soul to hold on to someone who has already left." "Is that why you left?" he asked, voice trembling. Mahapara nodded. Then gently touched Sarfaraz's forehead. In that moment, hundreds of images flooded in. Not from this life, but from many past lives. He had been a gatekeeper at a Tibetan monastery, where Mahapara was a young nun. He had been a camel herder in the desert, who rescued a girl from slavers. It was her. He had once been an orphan in a burned village, cared for by a woman in white. That was her. "We've crossed paths in countless forms," Mahapara whispered. "And not once did you demand anything. You only gave." Then Mahapara pulled from her cloak a silk pouch, silver blue in color, embroidered with golden dragon thread. She placed it into his hand. "This is a gift from a realm you do not belong to, but which has acknowledged you." "What's inside?" Sarfaraz asked. Mahapara didn't answer. She simply smiled. "If you are greedy, it will destroy you. But if you remain Sarfaraz, it will become the key to opening a path of goodness for hundreds of others." Before he could ask anything more, the other 2 spirits appeared. Each placed a hand on Mahapara's shoulder. All 3 slowly faded into the silver mist, leaving behind a voice that echoed into the night. "If a girl ever calls to you in the middle of the night, don't be afraid. She might just be a soul in need of someone to believe in her." Sarfaraz returned home. His mother was waiting beside the fire. He placed the silk pouch on the table. She didn't open it. She simply looked at her son with eyes that glowed like lotus lanterns. "You don't need to show me. Because I've already seen. Not with my eyes, but with faith." The next morning, Sarfaraz opened the pouch. Inside were not only gold and jewels, but also a deed to an old house in the city center, a set of anonymous stock certificates that had multiplied in value many times, and an unsigned contract, with a single line written: "From now on, every action you take can change someone's life. Use this, to return light to the darkest places." Sarfaraz never became a tycoon, but he built a small medical clinic, a school for orphans, and a microloan fund for rickshaw drivers. When someone asked, "Why didn't you use it to change your own life?" he simply smiled. "Because my life already changed. When a girl who wasn't human taught me how to live as a kind human being." Laughter still echoes in the night from the banyan tree at Shahabli. But no one is afraid anymore. People say, if you hear that sound, smile. It might mean someone is being led to a blessing they never expected. If you're still watching this video and believe that kindness will always be rewarded, please comment the number 5 below to let us know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we encourage you to do so and turn on the bell, so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content to inform and inspire you. 3 months had passed since that fateful night. Shahabli, the house once dubbed the Demon's Den, was no longer rumored to be haunted. Not because the spirits had vanished, but because people had begun to understand. Not everything invisible is meant to be feared. Sarfaraz lived differently now, but not distant from life. He still pedaled his rickshaw each day, even though now he could afford a fleet of electric cars. People called him the strange rich man, the man who could own anything, but only kept his mother's old prayer beads and the white scarf Mahapara once left behind. The people in the neighborhood slowly changed how they saw him. The street child once wandering the market now had a scholarship from the Shahabli Light Fund. The elderly vegetable seller whom Sarfaraz had given free rides for 3 months now owned a small stall in the market, thanks to his quiet investment. And the red brick house that once sat as a garbage dump was now a library, with a small inscription at its gate. People ask if souls are real. I just smile and say, sometimes, a soul is someone who once saved you, even if they're no longer here. One autumn afternoon, Sarfaraz was invited to speak at the University of Karachi, to share his journey out of poverty. The host introduced him. This is Sarfaraz, from an unknown rickshaw driver to a symbol of integrity and selflessness. When he stepped up to the podium, Sarfaraz simply said, "I'm not here to talk about success. I'm here to tell you that I didn't sell my soul when I had nothing left to hold onto." The entire hall fell silent. Then a young woman stood and asked, "Do you truly believe you met a real spirit? Or was it just a hallucination on a lonely night?" Sarfaraz replied softly, "If a spirit can teach you to live better, to love deeper, and to forgive more, does it even matter if it was real or not?" That night, he returned to Shahabli. Not because of a calling, not hoping to see Mahapara again, but because he felt the need to say one final goodbye. Beneath the old banyan tree, he placed a small wooden box. Inside were a letter he'd never sent, written to Mahapara, a journal listing the small good deeds he'd done since meeting her, and the bracelet he had worn since childhood, the last keepsake from his late father. He set it down and whispered, "If there's another life, let me repay a piece of what you gave me." A breeze stirred, soft, like an embrace with no form. Then something strange happened. A few weeks later, a baby was found abandoned at Sarfaraz's doorstep. No documents, no note, only a white frangipani flower tucked into the blanket. His mother, now old but still sharp, looked at the flower and smiled. "That girl has sent you another gift." Sarfaraz took the baby in his arms. No birth certificate. No DNA needed. His soul already knew. He named the child Parama, meaning the light beyond rebirth. Parama grew up, different from other children. By 5, she could speak 3 languages. She drew symbols no one had taught her. And once, while walking past the Havli with her father, she said, "Dad, I used to live here. But back then, I didn't have a name." Sarfaraz simply smiled, held her hand, and replied, "Now you do. And a real home too." Shah Havli has now been restored. Not to sell. Not to live in. But as the Mahapara's Center for Compassion. A haven for single mothers and orphaned children. People no longer whisper of ghosts in the old mansion. They tell stories of a soul. A girl who once couldn't find peace, but freed her entire karmic lineage through love. And sometimes, when new rickshaw drivers arrive in the city, they still hear stories about Sarfaraz. About a man who refused to keep gold when he was poorest. Refused to hold on to love when it couldn't be possessed. And refused to cling to truth, when that truth would bring someone else pain. New Moon Special Epilogue, Mahapara, Memoirs of a Wandering Soul. Not all spirits seek to harm. Some are simply those who have never been fully loved. Mahapara, from her final journal, translated from Resonant Memory. I am Mahapara. I was once the daughter of a brave man but a prideful one. He didn't believe in God. Didn't believe in karma. He only believed that if he was skilled enough, he could command even the nameless spirits. When he summoned his first jinn, I was 16. I remember that night vividly. The sky thundered without rain. My room shook as if a dragon were beating its wings beneath the floor. From that day on, my father was no longer the same. He looked at people as though they were insects. And Shah Havli, our home, became a fortress of darkness. My sisters and I could not leave. Not because we were locked in, but because we were held by the very entities my father had summoned. They didn't let us die. Didn't let us live. They left us to wander without shadows, without age, without full memory. We still ate. Still spoke. Still dreamed. But everything felt like it was happening underwater, behind thick glass. We tried to leave the Havli. We could not walk past the banyan tree. Then came that fateful night. We saw a poor boy pedaling a rusted bike, sweat dripping from his hands onto the worn handlebars. He didn't know he was the 37th we had tested in the last 20 years. The 36 before him. Some ran away in fear. Some took the bag of gold and disappeared. One sold his house, bought a villa, and died in a strange accident. Only him, he took nothing. He came back looking for us. I wasn't surprised. I was moved. For the first time in 20 years. I saw the heart of a man who had not been claimed. I decided to come to him. Not to test him, but to understand. I asked to live as a human just for a little while. To cook rice. To hear someone call me big sister. To sleep in a cramped little home that felt warmer than any palace from 1,000 years. I loved his mother. Loved his little sister. Loved the very life he once called poor. Because there, no one called me a spirit. No one feared me. No one asked me to be anything other than Mahapara. I wanted to stay forever. But I couldn't. Not because of the laws of heaven, but because of the law of the heart. He deserved a life filled with light, unburdened by tangled threads of fate. He was the one who opened the gate to save us. He should never be trapped inside it. So I left. I still watch over him. When he adopted the baby named Parama, I was there, in the wind, tucking a white frangipani flower into her blanket. Parama is not my reincarnation, but she is the seed of virtue he planted. A child with no parents, but with karma far purer than thousand sparing family names. As for me, I am fading, not vanishing, but becoming light. Every shard of resentment, every broken memory, is healing. Someday, I will be reborn. Not as Mahapara the lost soul, but as someone new, carrying a heart that once knew love without needing to possess it. If anyone were to ask me, does it hurt to be a soul that cannot move on? I would say, not as much as it hurts to leave the one person who made me want to be human. And if, one day, you hear laughter in the middle of the night, don't be afraid. It might be me, or someone like me, just wanting to remind you. In this world, there are spirits who only need you to believe. Believe that they're not nightmares, but lessons.